an exorcist had shared with me that the enemy had been complaining in an exorcism. And of course, we take all of that with a grain of salt. But he
Right,
was
right.
saying that when even just one person in a family begins to take the rosary as a lifestyle, the graces from that one individual begin to flow into the other members of the family. And his grip on the individual and on the family begins to loosen.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
I didn't know this was a fight.
That's why you're losing.
Today we are beginning either to domesticate the devil or else to deny him. He is most powerful when he is denied.
Welcome to The Devil is in the Details. The devil may be in the details, but God is on the throne. You may have noticed that I am solo today. Dad is not doing well. By the time that this goes out, he has recovered. It's food poisoning, nothing too serious, but prayers for him regardless. And I'm very excited because we have a guest on that we've had on our other show, Divine Intimacy Radio, who just absolutely rocked it. And we're going to be talking a little bit about his new book that's coming out. Go ahead and give you his bio. Gabriel Castillo is a Catholic lay evangelist and videographer. In addition to his public speaking, he's popularly known for his YouTube channel, Gabby After Hours. His talks, documentaries, and videos have more than 30 million views. Gabriel's favorite topics are the Eucharist, the Virgin Mary, the Rosary, and the lives of the saints. Today, we're focusing on the Rosary. You have a new book coming out. It is titled The Power of the Rosary, that you can order now from Sophia Institute Press. We'll have the links in the description. And welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be in your program. I'm sad to hear that your father isn't doing well. Your dad was actually the one who made the connection for me with Charlie from Sophia Institute Press. I wanted to be able to thank him face to face, but you'll have to send on my regards and my Thanksgiving to him.
I will. And I mentioned before the show, he sends his regards.
Thank you.
He was very excited to be able to talk, and then this whole thing happened. So we were talking a little bit before about kind of not necessarily where we wanted to go. I like having the more conversational aspect and having it more free form. But what I've known you for a while, or rather I should say that I've consumed a lot of your videos. I found, maybe we can touch on this at some point, but our mutual friend Ryan Bethea, your episode with him on his new show was phenomenal. I highly recommend people watch it. What kind of sparked this desire to write this book, and what, it's when people write something, they're passionate about it. And I know from that interview with Ryan and from some of the other things that you've talked about, you have a lot of personal experience here. So was it the personal experience that sparked the book? Was it the love that sparked the book? Combination? What was
right? So books are not the best way to reach people today anyways. So video productions, podcasts is the number one means that people consume content. And so I have felt this personal conviction to be a promoter of the Rosary and basing that a lot off of my own experiences. So I had been doing a lot of public speaking. I've been speaking about the Rosary and the power of the Rosary for over 15 years. But writing a book is a necessary component of that, because you can say things and you can hear things on a podcast that you consume on social media, and it doesn't have the same root system that consuming a book does. When you sit down with a book, the Holy Spirit works in a different way where it enters more deeply into the soul. I think that seeing the words, hearing the person's voice in your head at the same time, and then just the way that the Holy Spirit works when you're consuming content through literature, it's just a necessary element when you're trying to push a movement forward. And so I wrote the book because words weren't good enough. There's a lot of misunderstandings on the Rosary. And a lot of times any content on the Rosary is aimed more at apologetics and fending off the Protestants and saying, well, all the words are in the Bible and it's the life of Jesus. But I personally have found that most Catholics don't pray the Rosary well. So they're going through the motions, they're saying Our Fathers and Hail Marys, and that's fine. But the number one thing about the Rosary, and your father also wrote a book on this, is encountering Jesus Christ in the meditations of the mysteries. Like if you're not doing that, what you're doing is, it's better than nothing. It's good. Saying Our Fathers and Hail Marys is good, but all of the doctors of the church say that mental prayer must play an integral role in every person's spiritual life. And the overwhelming majority of Catholics don't do that. Just from common interaction with people, you just don't hear that.
Yeah, and I got a note. I loved when I was listening to you on Ryan's show, and the name is slipping my mind at the moment. I loved
The
that
Exorcist Files. Yeah, the Exorcist Files. Yeah.
Well, you were also on his newer
Heaven,
show.
Heaven Meets Earth. That's right. That's a great point.
Right.
Yeah, Heaven Meets Earth. Yeah.
And on Heaven Meets Earth, I loved that you were not in apologist mode. You were very, very strong and very clear. And the question at the end, what would you? It was something along the lines of, what would you suggest for people who are struggling? You said, pray the Rosary. You said, I know that this is mostly a Protestant audience, but I'm telling you, this is the good it's going to do for you if you do this. So I really appreciate that. In terms of personal experience, what got you really as on fire as you are for the Rosary?
Right. So there's two things. So one is sensational and the other one is very calm. So I had been the product of a single parent household, which when I was growing up wasn't as common as it is today. Now, 50% of all marriages ended in divorce. Back then, it wasn't as common. And so I had a father wound in addition to not having any formal religion. So natural revelation wasn't there through my parents to provide an image of God, but also no catechesis. And so I got addicted to pornography from a very young age, seeking love in all the wrong places. And I had that addiction all throughout high school, going into college. I was very intellectually attracted to Catholicism because I had never heard of universal truths before. It was very much whatever you believe, that's right for you. And everybody's experience is different. And so the idea of concupiscence, the idea of natural law, universal moral law, all these things were really attractive intellectually. And so many of my classmates who were bad Catholics, and by bad, I mean they weren't really practicing their faith.
Sure.
They were all entering RCIA or receiving the sacrament of confirmation. And so I was like, hey, I want to do that. Like, I'm not a very good Catholic either. I don't practice, but I do believe this stuff. And so I was at a campus ministry event one evening. It was on Ash Wednesday. And the religious sister who was, I can just describe her as spicy, feisty, strong, but in a good way, like passionate, zealous lover of Christ. No excuses, not sugarcoating anything. So we were going around the circle discussing what we were going to give up for Lent. And I, of course, was doing the typical, well, I'm going to give up chocolate, no sweets during Lent. And she viscerally reacted and was like, no. She like just pointed like right in my face and said, no, mortal sin, give up mortal sin, try and make real progress. And I wasn't even offended. Honestly, I was like, that's a great idea. Like, that's perfect. I'll try to stop sinning, which of course, it's a lot easier said than done. Within 2 hours of being home alone, I had looked at improper materials on the internet, committed solitary sin. And God gave me the grace of true contrition. And I was genuinely sorry. And I had an awareness that my sin wasn't so much like a lifestyle choice. It was because I was a slave to my vices and to my passions. And so I made a verbal, out loud act of contrition. And I heard audibly my act of contrition being repeated to me in a very high pitched voice that was, I can't even try to replicate it because it hurts my throat to try and mimic it. And so the next day I went to campus ministry again and I was like, sister, this happened last night. Can you give me any recommendations? And she said, I think you really need to try and pray the Rosary before you go to sleep or whenever you enter your bedroom. And so she gave me a pamphlet on the Rosary and a Rosary. And when I opened the pamphlet, before I could get the words out, I believe a force physically grabbed me, shoved me, pinned me down on the bed, began to choke me. And I tried screaming out for help from my mother. She wasn't around. And interiorly, I had an illumination of the mind to pray, but to pray in my head. And so as I began to formulate the words inside of my mind, my throat felt like it was getting some release of pressure. And I was able to utter the words, Hail Mary. And the moment that the name of Mary left my lips, the force left my body, the room stopped spinning, and I was liberated in that moment. And so instantly I knew that whatever I was about to do was seriously powerful, that the name of Mary, even for a mortal sinner, even for somebody who'd been receiving communion sacrilegiously, that Our Lady didn't have a preference for those who were good, that she viewed me as a child and she came to my rescue immediately. I had no previous devotion to her whatsoever. And then the third thing that really was instilled in my heart was that this is real, that mortal sin is real, that demons are real, and I can't live like this anymore. And so I began to use the rosary just as my, I don't want to say weapon, because it was more like a medicine. Because what was happening when I was praying it, even though I didn't know what mental prayer was, the life of Christ slowly began to implant itself in my imagination. And I noticed that my will was slowly getting stronger. And so the rosary kind of became my medication, and I had to go to confession on a regular basis. And it was a long, hard struggle to fight what I didn't know at the time were diabolical obsessions, where my mind was flooded with perverse thoughts. I was weak in will from years of just giving in to my passions. So I was fighting an obsession, an overwhelming temptation of the intellect, as well as wrestling with my own human frailty. And the rosary, I found, provided the grace that I needed to begin to start taking steps to go to the sacraments more frequently, to begin to deny myself and take up small penances and mortifications. But what I have discovered is that when you pray the rosary, it is actually more of a manifestation of your Marian consecration than simply saying a prayer of Marian consecration. So anybody at the beginning of the day can say, "Blessed Mother, I surrender my day to you." But when you actually crush your will for 15 to 20 minutes and enter into her school where she teaches you the life of Christ, that crushing of your will for 20 minutes is more concretely giving over of your time and your will to hers to be receptive to the holy will of God. And you begin making extraordinary progress. And I'm going to share with you something that just recently hit me. So I mentioned that I didn't have a father growing up, and the father wound was really strong in me. And as you probably know, that where there's one major wound, there's a lot of other side wounds. So I had the father wound, of course, but then I also had abandonment issues, issues about people not really loving me. So there's all these tangential things you're recovering from. But for me, the most obvious was I didn't have a father. I want to be a good father. And so in writing this book, my wife, who I didn't have religion, I didn't have a father, addicted to pornography. Statistically, my marriage is going to end in divorce. If you're just looking at it statistically, I'm going to abandon my children just like my father abandoned me. So through the praying and the crushing of my will of the rosary, Our Lady healed me of my porn addiction, gave me a wife who was able to edit my book. My son and my daughter both contributed by doing the audio book for the book. And my daughter wrote a testimony of the rosary. So on Father's Day, I was like, "God, you're so good. Like, Blessed Mother, I know like your burden is easy and your yoke is light, but you have healed me in a very personal way, in a way that touches my heart." And then as I was reviewing the cover for the book, this was just like literally a couple months ago, I was reviewing the cover for the book in Spanish, and the title in Spanish is El Poder del Rosario. And when I saw that title, I began to cry because the Spanish title, the word for rosary is Rosario. My father's Italian. I had always called him and referred to him as Ross, but his birth biological name is Rosario. So for me, it was like the source of my father wound was Rosario, but Our Lady, in her manipulation of God's providence, or her participation in God's providence, used the wound to also be the remedy. So for me, it was like this perfect circle. And so I say that because when people begin to have a Marian devotion, a lot of times it's kind of like checking off a box, or it's a very mechanical thing. I say this prayer of consecration or entrustment, but for Mary, it's not mechanical. For Mary, it's very personal. And the changes that she begins to bring about in your life will be personalized. And just like any good mother, a good mother knows the ins and outs of her child's heart. And as you begin to pray the rosary, she will give you tailor-made graces as well as allow tailor-made crosses, because every good mother also knows the weaknesses of their child. And so she will allow certain challenges to enter their lives to certainly strengthen them in those weaknesses.
It's so fascinating listening to you tell that story, because our histories have so much in common. I didn't have a father wound, but I had a very, very deep mother wound. My mother didn't necessarily leave. I've spoken about this on Catholic Gentlemen and other shows, but she was an alcoholic at the time. She had kicked my dad out of the house, and I think I've even spoken about it on this show. And it's fascinating. What you say is so true. And I just want to reiterate it for people, because at the time, even prior to my conversion, so I converted and I had a really hard time with the quote unquote Mary thing. I just didn't get it. But when I came into the church, because for me, it was also very intellectual. I was like, how do you argue against apostolic succession? That's the thing that caught me. It was like, this just makes perfect sense. You can trace it, all that stuff. But she plants a seed, whether you know it or not. And I think that's one of the gifts of the faith. And so even when I fell away from the church in my late teens, early 20s is when I became a police officer. I actually graduated the academy at 20 something, right at the right age where they give you a gun. Just made that cutoff. And I'd definitely fallen away at that time. I was receiving the Eucharist in mortal sin. I had no clue. I had no concept. Just poorly catechized, and at no fault of anyone but my own. I just wasn't paying attention. But she was still there. And I say all that to say, so I'm going through the police academy and I graduate, and I remember in the academy, and keep in mind, I again, like I said, I've essentially fallen away at this point. I'm repeating the Hail Mary over and over again, standing in formation, getting screamed at, repeating the Hail Mary. And by the way, in front of our academy was behind the jail. And so every morning in formation, we had prisoners who were screaming at us every morning. So that was an interesting kind of dynamic. And then soon after, entering into one of the most dangerous, top 10 most dangerous cities in the nation, and, chasing guys through the woods and Hail Marys going through my head. Now, later on, I also had a pornography addiction for a very, very long time, and ended up wrecking a marriage that I was in, which was later annulled by the church, by the grace of God. And it was fascinating. I'm trying to think of how to say this where I don't reveal what I don't want to reveal, but I remember going to the chapel where I got married and just weeping, struggling with this whole thing, right? Really trying to get back on track. I know what I'm doing is destroying my life, and it had already destroyed my marriage. And I remember the first time Mary really kind of reached out was, I'm on my knees. I'm leaving the chapel now. I'm coming out of the pew and I'm kneeling. And I heard, the battle has already been won. And there's something interesting about that, because it was in my mind, but I knew that it was Mary, because my eyesight immediately went to the statue of Mary. And I've held on to that for so many years. And there's all these different ways that she's shown up. I'll tell you this one more story, and then we can kind of talk about this, because it carries off of what you just said about her with crosses and healing. So I've been going to therapy for years. And most recently, the past year and a half, 2 years, I've been doing pretty intensive EMDR. I've spoken about this on the show too. People can go back and listen to it. I don't want to take too much time there. Recently, I was going through a memory that was pretty traumatic, where I had caused a whole lot of pain and sin and hardship, and not just for myself, but for other people. And there was so much shame that was wrapped around that. So I'm in this memory, and I'm looking back at myself at that time, going through the process, through the therapy. And I kid you not, Mary, I don't know if I've ever actually talked about this publicly. Mary shows up in this memory. I can see her. And she's a younger version of herself. I've never imagined her as anything other than like the mother of God. So, you know, but she's young, and she puts out her hand and she says, "Give it to me. Give it to me." And I get emotional thinking about it, proceed to all these things I was calling myself, all these names, all these things I believed about myself, the shame. So I give her one. She says, "Give it to me." Give her another one. She says, "Give it to me." Give her another. And this goes on for, I don't know how long. It felt like forever. And it was beautiful, and it was so healing. And it was this this closing of this wound. So why do I say all that? Well, you've experienced something similar, and we both know that one of the primary ways that the enemy interacts in our lives is through these wounds. So whether it's a father wound, a mother wound, wounds from sin, when we pray the rosary, as you've said, with as much dedication and attention as we can muster in the moment, because it is hard sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's busy. The graces that come from that and what she wants to do to heal our hearts, to close those doorways, is so profound. I just wish people understood more. I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, or if you think otherwise, but I think a lot of us Catholics are like, oh yeah, we got to pray the rosary, but I don't think they truly understand the depths of what she is doing in our hearts and our minds. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. So I'm going to talk about something that I've only spoken about once publicly.
Sure.
And that is what you discussed. You said EMDR and healing of our wounds. So one of the theories that I have in the book is that, according to all the great saints, that after the holy sacrifice of the Mass, that the rosary is the greatest prayer. And that if this is a divine tool for prayer that Our Lady has invented, that means it will be the greatest at everything. And so I was giving a talk recently, and I was figuring out these wounds. So like you said, that Our Lady appeared in your mental picture, in your mental image, pausing that traumatic experience that you went through. So I came up with what I call the spiritual healing rosary. So for those who aren't aware, like in traditional therapy, what you would do is you would go back, you would float back to where you originally had this root wound. So for me, my root wound happened in the womb at conception, because my parents were never married. And so I've always so it went deeper than just not having a father. I was conceived in sin. I shouldn't be here. So go back, float back to where that first original sin, in this case for me, was in the womb. Visualize it, freeze it, speak truth to the lie, because the devil is the father of lies, and he hides in our wounds, and he hides in traumatic experiences, and he inserts his voice back then because we don't notice it because of the pain and the trauma. Right. So speak truth to that lie, and then in your rosary, present that child, or in my case, this, baby in the womb, or if it's a child seeing pornography for the first time, bring that child, speak to the truth, to what they needed to hear, and then bring that child into the mystery that you're meditating upon. So at the scourging at the pillar, say, little Jesus, look at little me the first time I saw pornography, speak to his heart. And then holding little me there, watching Jesus get scourged at the pillar and being like, look what he's doing for you. And I was giving a talk, and when we were doing this exercise, and there was about 500 people there, I would say 99% of them were crying. And that means that they themselves had some wound in their past that it still causes them pain to think about, that they have not received healing from. So Our Lady, being so cunning as she is, goes and says, pray the rosary every day at all the church-approved Marian apparitions. But she wants to do, just as you said, so much to our heart that we have no clue, that we just walk through like with stab wounds in our hearts and a knife in our back from betrayal. And Our Lady's like, just give me 15 or 20 minutes, spend time with my son in the mysteries, and allow me to work in your life. It's just like you said, she has a role to play, and we don't realize how deep that she wants to work in our hearts,
and how overwhelming her love is for us to want to do that. I mean, it's fascinating, because one of my primary roles here is studying spiritual warfare. You should see the stack of books on my desk. It's absurd, the time we spend with exorcists and all these other different things. But my favorite means and methods to, quote unquote, engage in spiritual warfare is exactly what we're talking about. It's not, the sensationalism is fine to a certain extent. Testimony is good. It drives the story, right? But where's the real war happening in our minds and hearts? And then how is God wanting to heal those things? Well, it's through his mother most of the time. I mean, there's so many stories where she is crushing the head of Satan. And I think people get too caught up. The reason I mentioned sensationalism is I think people get too caught up in it, and they don't realize that something, as simple as the rosary is really so meritorious and powerful in pushing back the kingdom of the enemy. And I wish that we had more of a understanding and devotion, which is why I was very pleased that we're going to be able to do the show. So is there any other, and I know I've been harping on sensationalism. I don't mean to, I said,
no, I understand.
Good, but yeah.
No, I don't. I honestly am very irritated. So I know that there's a lot of exorcists out doing a lot of good, talking about stories that are sensational. But I think that so many times now the word spiritual warfare has been put to exorcism and things flying across the wall, when true and authentic spiritual warfare happens 95% of the day. And the overwhelming majority of people don't even realize it. They don't realize that the little negative self-talk in their head, their abandonment of the inspirations that they receive in prayer, that is the spiritual warfare that the devil is really waging a battle against. It revolves on God's holy will. It's not that 0.01% where there's a drug addict who, made a pact with Satan to get more drugs, and then you have to do an exorcism. That's great. And you can see the power of God over evil, but you're missing the battle, actually, and you're being entertained, religious entertainment, and it's at the detriment of the spiritual lives of an overwhelming majority of Catholics.
Yeah, it's I'm smiling now because before the show I said I think we're cut from the same cloth, and the more we speak, that becomes more and more apparent. I'm very pleased. So, yeah, I just to reiterate to people, and I'll tell this story too. So I recently had discovered a lie that I'd believed about myself, that it was so deeply ingrained. To your point, the 95% of the time that we're really in the battle, it was so deeply ingrained that I had no clue that it was existing, essentially. So I again, like I said, I study this stuff all the time. We live it. We have a show about it. By all accounts, by all metrics, I should have been aware, and I wasn't aware because of how devious the enemy is. Why did I become aware? 2 reasons. One is, I believe, because of my prayer life, because of daily mental prayer, the Rosary, the daily examen. I think those are the 3 non-negotiables for any Catholic.
For sure.
And then having someone who also has that same prayer life, who loves me, who was able to say, hey, I think you need to take a step back and consider what you just said about yourself. And that's when it clicked. And you want to know, when I say I wept, and it was bittersweet, because it was this, thank you, Lord, for revealing this to me. And I do believe Mary had a huge part of it as well, revealing this wound. But then also, oh my goodness, I believed this about myself for so long. I've repeated this lie for so long. It was just second nature. Say all that to say, these are the insights that come from when you have when you're surrounded with good people, of course, but primarily when you are engaged in this type of prayer.
Right.
Yeah. So
St. Thomas Aquinas said that you learn more from prayer than you learn from books. Yes. And it's not that you learn more facts from prayer. You just have a deeper understanding, and God speaks back to you. He's a real person who sees you and can put his finger on exactly what's wrong and can reveal it to you. Yes,
I couldn't agree more. We have I have to be careful how I say it, because I can be a little overzealous at times, but sure. I think we also have a tendency to focus on, and I even said it, the stack of books versus the very real relationship that we have with God and his mother. You're going around giving all these talks and you're communicating with people. In terms of testimony, have you had any kind of profound, has anyone come back to you and said, because of this, I started praying the Rosary and this is what happened?
So you broke up a little bit and you're frozen on my screen, but are you still there? Let me know.
I'm still here. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, good. Okay. So I think that you said, have I had people give me profound testimonies because of the Rosary? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, on a consistent basis, I would say that the age-old adage of you will either give up the sin or you'll give up the Rosary, that is 100% consistent in every single circumstance that I've seen. Now, when there is a pernicious sin, I have seen that it would take praying all of the mysteries of the Rosary all day. And that's for several reasons. One, because you have a consistent prayer life. You're praying in the morning, you're praying in the afternoon, you're praying in the evening. You have Jesus Christ with you in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. You're invoking the Holy Mother of God in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. And when that's the circumstance, I can say infallibly, you will not persistent sin. Like I just have never seen it. A gentleman had come up to me and was like, I tried praying the rosary and my sin got worse and I'm hopeless and all these things. And I was like, you're lying to me. Like, I know you're lying to me, because the fruit of praying the rosary is confidence in the Mother of God, not despair. And you sound like a man who's in despair. And you probably quit the rosary after the first sign of pushback, but that's because the enemy knew that if you persevered in this devotion, that you would defeat him. Well, St. Teresa of Avila says nobody who begins mental prayer will be a child of Satan for very long, or something to that effect. So moral conversions consistently, it's like the number one means. But even more powerful than that, so in the book that I wrote, the last chapter is testimonials that I've collected from people that I know personally. I didn't ask, hey, who's got the best story? I literally asked 39 people that I knew who prayed the rosary. And I said, hey, do you have a story? And one of the things that surprised me the most was that there are some people who were praying all the mysteries in this case, just to grow in holiness, just to try it for a season, just to pray for somebody's conversion. And several of them said, once I began praying all the mysteries of the rosary, my scrupulosity went away. I used to be an insomniac and I couldn't sleep at night. And I started praying all the mysteries and my insomnia went away. I had struggled with depression since middle school. I started praying all the mysteries of the rosary. And so that could mean one or two of two things. Either Our Lady healed them, or those may have had some diabolical root that was removed without their realizing it. So that is what caught me by surprise. And even more than that, people recognizing their vocation. I would say the greatest fruit from having a consistent prayer of the rosary is, number one, you're going to have peace of soul. But you're not just going to have the peace of soul because you're making an active faith in the presence of Mary. It's that when you begin to pray, the voice of God begins to resonate in your heart. So let's say you're driving your rosary, you're praying the rosary, you're driving home from work, you're tired, you're hungry, you want to just go home and relax. You begin to pray the rosary and your heart begins to ponder your obligations at home. I haven't spent some time with my middle child. My wife is probably also tired and hungry. And you don't hear the voice of God in your head, but you just have this tugging on the heart that you should go home and say, hey, why don't I make dinner tonight? Hey, my daughter, why don't you come with me to the grocery store? And so that is the way that God communicates. These tuggings on the heart, that's his consistent method of communication. And so when you begin to feel that more consistently, and then in prayer, you begin to have the courage and the grace to actually follow through with God's will, that also results in a deeper peace because you're living your life in union with the holy will of God. And then on top of that, your crushing of your will to do God's will makes everything a prayer. At Fatima, Our Lady told the children, offer everything as a sacrifice. So your life is being grace-filled because you're in union with the will of God. Graces are flowing into the lives of your loved ones because you're crushing your will to do God's will. And then this is a consistent side effect of everybody who prays the rosary. St. Bartolo Longo, just canonized yesterday,
Right, yeah.
would say, he who ponders our Lord in his imagination desires to be one with him in reality. And so people who are faithful to the rosary and pray it well, they are inevitably drawn to receive Jesus in Holy Communion more frequently. They're drawn to the sacrament of confession more frequently. And then that itself becomes like another source of divine grace. And so Our Lady, when she says pray the rosary, it's because that opens the door to every other door in the spiritual life. The rosary is not the end of the spiritual life. It's not the goal of the spiritual life, but it's kind of like the key that makes mental prayer accessible to the common man. It draws you closer to the sacraments. It helps you prevent from sin. It helps you to discern God's voice and resist the temptations of the enemy. So truly, a litany of side effects and a litany of testimonies happen when people are faithful to this prayer. It's of divine origin. I'm thoroughly convinced.
Yeah, I'm completely on the same page. And your first story led perfectly to the question that I was trying to figure out how to articulate. The enemy often, whenever we have people who first enter mental prayer, as you mentioned, first start praying the rosary, take on Exilium Christianorum, whatever the prayers may be, the enemy starts pushing back. And you already gave some precedent on how to for us to push back. Is there any other suggestions you would give to people? Because ultimately, whenever we do these, someone's going to say, well, I've tried this and this happened, right? This
Right.
thing popped up. So what advice would you give them?
Yeah. So pushback is a good sign. That means what you're doing is working. It's always very discouraging when somebody tells me of their pushback. And then I ask, so what did you do? And they say, well, I stopped praying the rosary. Okay, well, don't stop what was obviously working. So there's two ways to win a war, and the devil knows this. It's head-on combat, and he can't beat you in head-on combat. If you're a child of God, you're living in the state of grace, he can't beat you. So what he tries to do is the second method. Cut off your connection to your strength, cut off your weapons, cut off your supplies, cut off your sustenance. So cut off prayer. So the enemy will push back. There's a couple of things. I find this helpful because sometimes I still struggle with diabolical obsessions, not necessarily to lust, but overwhelming cloud of sadness, unexplainable anxiety that just out of nowhere. I usually will, once I recognize it's an evil spirit, for my own sake, I ask myself the question, why is this happening? So the devil might be tempting me to lust in a disordered way that's out of the ordinary, and I recognize I'm in this battle with him. But one of the things that strengthens me is when I say, why is he doing this? He must not want me in the state of grace. He's trying to ruin some aspect of my life. Something big must be coming up. And then that's kind of like, yeah, I need to fight. So in the name of Jesus and Mary, I bind you, spirit of lust. Now, my only caution with using binding prayers is that people tend to overdo everything and they will make everything a binding prayer. So my rule of thumb is 3 times with fervor and conviction and drop it. Focus your attention on Jesus Christ and Our Lady in their lives, in the Gospels, in your prayer, in the Blessed Sacrament. So number 1, expect it. Number 2, ask why. Why am I suddenly filled with anxiety? Is it because I'm going to go give a talk? Is it because I'm making a presentation? Is it because I'm going to lead a retreat and the enemy doesn't want me to follow through? Because then when you realize that, the why behind it, and you see this more as a personal attack and not just like, I'm just in a rut today. Like, yeah, you might have woken up on the wrong side of the bed, but usually there's also a piggyback temptation because the devil doesn't waste any opportunities, especially when we don't notice. So yeah, that, and just fight back, as St. Ignatius of Loyola says, consider this an attack and fight back manfully, because in his words, these are not my words, I would never say anything like this. I'm not woke, but I'm awake. He said that the devil is much like a woman. And if you attack this woman with fervor and conviction, she's going to back off. I agree with the sentiment. I might not call the devil a woman, maybe more like a small dog, that if you stand manfully. And then at the same time, I want to also caution on that episode that we did with Ryan Buffet on Heaven Meets Earth. I'm not one to attack the devil. I'm not one to verbally abuse him or to say things like, you can't do anything to me. Or I would never, ever do that. I treat the devil like a sharp knife. I don't play with it. And so I focus on Christ. But when I say fight back strong, pray harder. I don't mean verbally abuse the devil or attack him, because he is much more cunning than me. And I think in God's righteous justice, he would allow the devil to show me who's actually stronger, and I would be in mortal sin. So before the snap of a finger. So yeah, I would fight back manfully. But that does not mean verbally attack the devil, in my opinion.
I think you said it perfectly. I think you said it perfectly. We've talked about this before, where people tend to, there's 2 extremes, right? There's the extreme where people kind of put their head in in the sand and they want to pretend it's not happening. And then there's the extreme of people want to look for the devil under every rock. And that comes with a whole litany of other problems. You know, we know from moral theology, virtus in medio stat, the virtue's in the middle. That's where God wants us.
Yes.
You know,
right.
And so we don't need to be doing, you know, I have never heard the 3 and then stop. What's fascinating is last time I was with exorcists in DC, I caught on, they never said it specifically, but I caught on that they repeated certain prayers 3 times, but they did that very thing. They did it 3 times and then they stopped or they moved on to something else. And that's a whole different situation. But I think that's a very important rule. I'm probably going to end up keeping that in my back pocket for folks. So maybe we can close out with this too. One of the other ways that the enemy attacks, or rather one of the things that he hates, is the family. So good, strong men, parents, you know. So I've noticed that when I came back to the faith and I started really meditating on on the life of Jesus, especially through the Rosary, my father's heart, you're a father, I'm a father, my father's heart was transformed in such a way that I looking at Jesus as a baby through the eyes of Mary, even as a father, it was just insight that I would have never had I just sat and read the Gospels, which is very good. I'm not comparing the two. I think it's a grace that comes from the Rosary. So with your experience also as a father, what has that done for you? Has, I'm maybe not asking for how the enemy has attacked, but like how has that transformed you as a man and as a father?
Right. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. First and foremost is that I pray all the mysteries of the Rosary every day. And one of the reasons is for the protection of my family. And one of my intentions is for the sanctity of my family. And that has happened. My children, I have a son who's a senior in high school. I shelter them, but not as much. I'd probably offend some pious Catholics by how little I shelter them. I shelter them, but not too much. But they're amazing young people. My son prays all of the mysteries of the Rosary every day on his own. I don't force him. And one of the testimonies in the book, The Power of the Rosary, the very first testimony was from my daughter. She's 13 years old. And she had asked me, Dad, can I write a testimony for the book? And instinctively, I was like, no, I don't know why, but I think it's because when I look at her, I don't see a broken person. And so, but then afterwards I was like, you know what? Yeah, actually that would be really great. I would love for you to be a part of this once once I was being more not choleric, like the way I am, instantly reacting. And then her testimony made me cry because she talked about how she was raised on the Rosary since the age of 3. And I'll be honest, I did not go out of my way to instill in my daughter a Rosary devotion. We do pray the Rosary as a family, but because of my own devotion, because I pray the Rosary, because if I'm praying more than one Rosary, I'm going to be knocking some Rosaries out while I'm driving. And I would pray the Rosary in the car. And of course, if you're in the car, I'm not going to have music when I'm trying to pray the Rosary. So everybody in the car has to pray with me. And so because I would kind of impose my own devotion on their life without even meaning to, it made a huge impact on them. And my daughter goes and gives testimony to the fact that she's been praying the Rosary since childhood, mostly in the family. But because of that, she's found herself in situations where she's now integrating the Rosary into her daily life on a regular basis on her own without me, which is really the goal, to get our children to pray even outside of the family. Like, she's a good and holy girl. And so I have seen it pour out into my family. And one of the most beautiful, all of my beautiful memories, my most beautiful memories for my children are teaching them the Rosary, hearing my son say the Hail Mary for the first time, hearing my daughters ask, hey, can you tell me the story of the life of Jesus? And then I'll tell them like a little child version of the agony in the garden. And they say, okay, we're going to pray 10 Hail Marys. And then we'll go on to the next mystery. And so for my kids to grow up thinking that family prayer is normal is probably the most beautiful, the thing I cherish the most. Like when I get to heaven, I can say, Lord, you gave me these children to protect and to preserve and to give their imaginations to you. And through your Blessed Mother's Rosary, I did that. I would really encourage families, starting from the youngest age, to begin to integrate the family Rosary and be okay with it said badly. As you mentioned, whenever you begin a new devotion that's powerful, the devil is going to fight you at every moment. When you begin to pray the Rosary as a family, his number one desire is to get you to stop that. Stop that. It's too irritating. The kids are bad. Your emotions are going to be heightened. So the way that I have found that has worked in persevering in the family Rosary is that at least one of the spouses needs to be praying the Rosary privately on their own in order to provide the graces to sustain the devotion as a family. If the only Rosary you're praying is with your wife and children, I just can't see that devotion lasting more than a month or two. Maybe it is, but in every circumstance that I have seen where that was the only Rosary that was happening, it's just, you just can't pray it well in a group. Like you can't pray it with mental prayer and because you're just too distracted. And so pray a good one by yourself, even if you're praying with your family, and the graces are going to abound. I can't say from where, but an exorcist had shared with me that the enemy had been complaining in an exorcism. And of course, we take all of that with a grain of salt. But he was saying that when even just one person in a family begins to take the rosary as a lifestyle, the graces from that one individual begin to flow into the other members of the family, and his grip on the individual and on the family begins to loosen, because that person becomes more and more a child of Mary, and therefore who you love, Mary loves. When you give your life to Mary, you give her your spouses, you give her your children. And so she takes them as her own. She loves them more than we do. And praying, it's like you give Our Lady permission to undo knots and to destroy plots, the plots that the devil lays bare in the family. So highly recommend. And one last thing, as a father, so you mentioned you're a father, I'm a father. All of the greatest saints, I'm thinking of Saint Pope John Paul II, Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, they were great. They're towering figures, but they were only towering figures because of the towering spiritual role that their fathers played in their life. John Paul II said that the most influential moments of his childhood were waking up really early and going into his father's room and seeing him kneeling down praying the rosary, or not being able to sleep, noticing that there was a candle lit in his father's bedroom and seeing his father on his knees late at night praying the rosary. Saint Therese said that when I saw my father praying, and he took her to daily mass, when I saw my father praying, it was like I would think to myself, that's what it must be like to see a saint pray. For a child not just to get the meaning and the purpose of their life by witnessing what their fathers are giving up their lives to do, but then also the graces of protection that flow from the father and into the children. You said it earlier. Actually, your dad said it earlier, because I was listening to your Devils in the Details, and he was talking about how he believes in the authority of the father and the authority of the wife. And so that spiritual authority is absolutely essential. And men must reclaim that authority and yield it and wield it as a weapon in the lives of their children and in their spouses.
The virtue of meekness, right? I mean, it's just so necessary. I love, I don't agree with everything Jordan Peterson says, but I love his definition of meekness. Meekness is the one who has the sword, knows how to use it, but keeps it sheathed.
Yes, I love that.
Brilliant example. Well, this was extremely edifying. I'm very glad we had this discussion. I sincerely hope that it helps people on a couple of fronts. One is so that they recognize, the reality of the healing that comes, because the healing is so, it really, how do I articulate this? The hearts and minds is the battlefield of the enemy, but the wounding affects both deeply. And Mary really, really, really wants to heal. And as soon as you start giving these things to her, she will step in ways that you would not believe. I even hesitate to tell some of the stories because they just seem like, how would that happen? Right? People would believe it. But then the reality of the spiritual warfare that we're in on a daily basis, as you said, that this is one of the preeminent ways, outside, of course, of the sacraments. But this sacramental is so beautiful and so powerful that if you are struggling with anything, this is going to be, you need to start. Get yourself right, of course, but then this has got to be where you really need to spend most of your time, in my belief. So, Gabe, where do you want to send people? Your YouTube channel?
Sure. Yes. So my YouTube channel is Gabby After Hours, and you can get the book, The Power of the Rosary, anywhere that books are sold. I really encourage people, I know a lot of Catholics, and everybody's who becomes Catholic buys a bunch of books and then they never read them. Yeah. If that's you, if you find yourself buying a bunch of books and not reading them, get the Audible, get the audiobook, available on Audible, available on Apple Books, available when audiobooks are available, because if there's any slow parts, I try to speak with conviction that will make something that might be slow reading more impactful listening. So I strongly recommend the audiobook, but reading is very powerful, as we discussed earlier.
I love it. All right. And of course, thank you again to the great folks at Sophia Institute Press for allowing this to happen and setting it up. And we end always with Romans 16:20, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Amen.